Hello, everybody. I am Jessie Badu-Perez, the editor, and I'm delighted to welcome you to another Unleash webinar. As you know, we've partnered with SHL today to discuss why now is a great opportunity to reshape your approach to talent management, but also to leverage the human connection. Before we kick off and I hand over to our panelists, I would love to encourage you to please send in any questions that you have via the Q&A tab on the platform, and we'll obviously do our very best to get through all of them. On another note, though, you'll also see several poll questions pop up on the screen, and they're also available in the poll tab on the platform. So please do take the time to participate, as we'd love to make the session as interactive and insightful as possible, and also to try and get as much information from where you sit and your challenges and opportunities, etc. But now, without further ado, I am going to hand over to our guests who are going to introduce themselves. So I will go with Sarah first.
Thanks, Jessie. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah McClellan. I lead our European Professional Services team here at SHL. Really looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Great. And over to you, Zani.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be here. My name is Zani Mashinini, and I'm an HR practitioner, and I've worked for multiple industries and organizations, both on the African continent and abroad. And I've been in HR for about 20 years now. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, great to have you and very welcome. And over to you, Brandon.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessie. My name is Brandon Pina. I head up the talent management solutions for SHL. I've been in SHL for a number of years, but also worked similar to Zani across the African continent in a variety of different organizations and different roles.
Great. Well, we have a lot to get through, and obviously the slides as a guide. So I'm just going to hand over to you, and I'll definitely be jumping in and out if I've got any questions. But as I said earlier, to everybody watching from home, please do let us know if you have anything that you'd like to know. Make the most of having our experts here today to ask any questions that you may have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jessie, and thank you so much for the introduction, and really excited to be with everyone this morning and today. As indicated, we want to keep this conversational, and certainly Sarah, Zani, and myself will have a conversation with a peppering of slides as we go along, just to set the scene for each of the discussion points. But to that point, please do share your questions and your comments in the Q&A as we go along, and Jessie will bring them into the conversation where it makes sense to, as well as then we will keep the conversation going between the three of us. So what are we really pushing for, and what's the focus of the conversation today in terms of setting the scene? What we know, and it's become such a part of the rhetoric of what we're seeing in HR on a day-to-day basis, the need for resilience, the need for agility, the need for diversity in the workplace. But what organizations are typically struggling with is to go, well, if that's the case, what sits underneath that allows me to achieve that resilience, that allows me to drive towards the agility and the diversity? And that really is the conversation that we want to have today, focusing on three elements. We want to talk about people and the shift that we're experiencing within our organizations and we're seeing happening in the marketplace around people and purpose. And Sarah will guide the conversation when we talk around people and purpose. But at the same time, we know that organizations are increasing their usage of data, and they're at the same time collecting that much more data. And so when we talk a little bit about science, we're going to talk about data, how it's being utilized, where it's being collected from, what are the benefits, what are the drawbacks and the risks. And ultimately, the final conversation will be to go, well, let's leverage the technology to see how we bring together the best of those, the purpose that we're pushing and driving for with people, but balanced against the data as well. So that's going to really be the three pillars of our conversation today. But as an introduction, and this was some research that was completed by Gartner in 2020, where they were looking at HR priorities. And these are the kinds of changes and the expected changes that HR professionals have indicated they expect to see over the next 2 to 3 years. And once more, many of them we've seen that. It's again the conversation around, okay, if we know that we need to reskill individuals, if we know that new roles are being created, 83% of crows telling us that there will be new roles, how do we begin to align people behind those? And that's really the focus for us today, is the idea of the organization as this living, evolving ecosystem, because it's in the ecosystem that we create the sense of agility and purpose and insight-led. And the challenge for an organization is getting that alignment right. And that's what we want to talk about today, to really talk about those three areas and how we align them in this ecosystem. Because at any given point in time, all of these activities are happening. There's the context we play in. There's the business strategy we're pursuing. There's these emergence of critical roles and shifting teams and shifting functions. And of course, each individual within our businesses brings their own skills and their behavior and the potential to the business. But there often feels like they're not at odds with each other, but pulling in different directions. And the challenge and the role of talent management today is very much that alignment, is how do we bring them into moments of alignment? The idea that we're always going to be aligned as an organization is one that's probably less than accurate. So it's about creating, and how do we create through technology and data more of these moments of alignment that we can then leverage in order to drive the purpose that our people experience, to create the thriving organization that we're really wanting to move towards, and making sure we bring that visibility. And as noted, we do that through three elements: the people component, the data component, and then the technology component. And that's what we'll talk through today. So we're going to start out and we're going to look at people to begin with. So Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Brandon. I really love that image that shows, how our organisations are very much becoming living ecosystems, and lots of forces are afoot in driving that. For example, I can just see from the people dialing in, we've got a very global audience. I'm sure many of you are sitting at home. Some of you might be back in offices. So that kind of distributed, flatter, more matrix organisation that is kind of changing the shape of our workplaces and how we interact. And as Brandon said, how then, or the role then that people need to play is absolutely evolving and changing too, because we all have desires to find connection, to find meaning, to feel purpose in the work that we're doing in the organisations that we're working within. So then in this first section, we're first of all actually going to ask you for your thoughts. So on the next slide, we've got a poll that we want to open up to get your input on this question. So who leads talent-related decisions and practices in your organisation? And you can select up to 2 responses, your top 2 responses. So the CEO, leaders, line managers, employees, human resources, or social media. Interesting last option there. But yeah, which 2 would you select in terms of who leads talent-related decisions and practices within your organisation today? And we'll give you just a few minutes to answer that poll.
While people are answering, and really just to, and I'll own the social media component in terms of that one, because it has been interesting, and Zania, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in this one as well, is that we're inundated, as much as we're going to talk about data today, we're inundated with knowledge. You've got LinkedIn, you've got Google, you've got how many different research organizations that are constantly pushing all of these ideas and thoughts around talent management towards us. And as a practitioner, the struggle becomes, where do I go? And so I begin to make decisions around my talent based on what seems to be topical in the media at any given point in time, whether it's something that a high-profile employee, a high-profile leader has placed on Twitter, it's a formal research report coming out, or just an interesting article that I read on LinkedIn. And I'm wondering your experience around how do you just manage that flow of information to make good talent decisions?
Yeah, thanks for that good question, Brandon. And it's interesting because that's a conundrum I've often found myself in, particularly when working in the area where I'm having to design the right solutions, because you often go to, well, what information is available? And as soon as you open that door, you're flooded with all these options, and you'll find yourself at times getting stuck. And that's why I think often you need to start with what culture are you in? What is the culture of your organization? And historically, we've always been taught as practitioners, let's benchmark, let's go externally, find out what best practice is. But often we know as soon as we find that best practice research, we get stuck and say, well, it's not working for us. What is the solution for us? And that's why I think as soon as you do more work in the culture space where you're trying to understand, well, where are your leaders at? What work do you need to do around leadership? And when you understand that, you then can start understanding, that innovation funnel. You can then start to take the information and narrow it down to, well, what's realistic, what's doable for your organization, but obviously bringing in the stretch, because we know disruption could easily take that control away. But you certainly want to be able to work with the information a lot better when you understand your culture. Remember, leaders, culture means you're doing work with leadership. And remember, as soon as we're looking at leadership, we're looking at the role of the manager in our organization. And remember, the manager is the bridge between the organization and its employees. And so if you're wanting to understand what is it what is relevant out there for me, how do I work through information, start that type of work, because it's going to help you be able to crystallize and prioritize and focus. So that's really how I would respond to that initial question, Brandon.
Awesome. Thank you, Zania. And it seems that not as that said about 1% of the audience responding around social media.
Yeah.
Quite possible that I'm that 1%.
Was that you, Brandon?
Yeah. Very well have been. But the sort of key, and I'd love to pick up, and we'll pick up the conversations on you around managers, and that point that you raised, that the manager sits as the bridge often between the executive and the leaders and the organization themselves, because the poll has almost entire position the two key drivers of talent-related decisions being leaders as this broad category, and then human resources as the other one. But line managers being less so, and yet they find themselves in that interesting nexus point. Sarah, and I know, to pick up the conversation going forward, only 4% or 4 individuals, 6% of people saying that the employee plays that central role in driving talent management decisions. And to the conversation we're going to have now, I mean, that's such an interesting response, because they are so central and pinnacle to what we're trying to achieve with our talent in organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So that's quite interesting. I think if you move to the next slide, Brandon, we can explore that a little bit more. That I think strikes me quite clearly. So employees only kind of leading talent related decisions, and I suppose actually the steer here is in leading. As you say, Zani, actually this is about getting information, the flow of information into the populations that we can empower to move around our organization and find those moments of alignment. So it's interesting, as you say, Brandon, that actually the strongest answers, the most popular answers coming out are leaders and human resources. So probably perhaps what we would expect. However, what we have been seeing more broadly, and Zani, again, it'd be great to get your thoughts on this in a moment, is a bit of a shift in focus for a number of different populations in relation to talent management. So as we step into this more ecosystem of organizations, of workplaces, we're seeing that leaders are actually having to move away from what were quite often siloed views, quite often, defined strategies. We used to have the luxury of talking about 3 to 5 year strategic plans. think at the minute we're talking about probably 3 to 5 months because of the sheer volume of disruption that we're experiencing. But also becoming much more about architecting the future. So thinking about how we can make and enable individuals to make connections with roles and opportunities in their organisation. And for human resources, people in HR, so in talent acquisition, in talent management roles, we're seeing this shift when we speak with our clients around that real link towards transformation. So enabling, facilitating constant transformation as the market shifts, as we face new challenges, but actually in many respects, from an HR point of view, stepping back and letting go. So allowing and enabling and empowering individuals to find their own connections, find their own opportunities. And as you say, Zani, as you said earlier, I think what becomes more and more valuable and more important is the information and the data that HR can provide access to open up those opportunities and see new paths. So as an individual, some of the forces at play here are, we live for much longer. We need to therefore work and finance being able to work and live for much longer. And also technology, AI, robotics mean that many aspects of the jobs that we've known are being automated. So we need to reskill, we need to develop new skills, we need to grow. And what we're looking for from the organisation is opportunities to develop those new skills, to try out opportunities, to feel trust, to feel empowered, to step into new and different roles. And Zani, just interested whether in your experiences in the last few years, whether there's anything in particular that's kind of ringing true for you in the organisations that you've worked within.
Yeah, I must say I'm liking the focus on the employee, and I'm wondering, you'll have to excuse me here, whether we've confused our employees, because historically we've always, as HR practitioners, come up with policies that would advocate for certain ways of approaching a decision as an employee. So right from which qualifications you should look at, what experiences you should gain. And I'm wondering now whether we should be shifting towards rather make that data available as insights for individuals to be able to empower themselves and make the relevant decisions around which is the right path I should follow. And so if you see the shifts here, we're saying to people, look at portfolio careers, look at multiple career paths. And I'm wondering whether we have to do more work to enable individuals to make those kind of independent decisions. Yes, at times, we know for the African continent, even South Africa, it may be about employability. But I think that's a principle across that we have to remain relevant as individuals. And so as HR practitioners, how are we enabling that? The data can be there to help individuals get the insights. We know we've got the tools that help with that, but I think more work has to be there to empower individuals to make those relevant choices for themselves and their career. So I do think the employee is quite critical in the shifts that talent management has to go. And we talk a lot around mobility and we talk about the open marketplace. But remember, the assumption you're making is that the employee is adapting as well. We've got to remember what we told them a year ago and 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we were very fixed in our views as HR practitioners. Now we've got to check and say, okay, what are the messages now? How do we bridge that gap if there is a gap between what we used to promote and what we're actually finding in today's world and potentially tomorrow? So I think for me, we could potentially leave our employees behind if we don't play that role in bridging those gaps and differences. And just back to the definition of talent management, I think it's very clear that talent management now is not just about fixed succession plans. It's really about how do we make the skills available when they are needed to solve the problems that have been identified by an organization at any point in time. So I think visibility, accessibility of information is therefore important, so that we know what are those skills that we need, are they available, but given the problems that we know our CEOs have shared with us.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation just around, I think it's really interesting observation, just that perhaps employees are feeling confused, because you're right, we have been in this very, well, typically, traditionally quite top-down organizations, almost parent-child in terms of relationship. You know, I'll guide you through this and I'll let you know when I think you're ready. Whereas we're now sort of turning on its head and saying to employees, actually, you know, it's on you. You know, we'll support you, we'll facilitate, but actually this is your career and you need to build it. Sorry, Brandon, let me bring you in there.
No, I think, Sarah, just leveraging off that, and interesting to hear both yours and Zani's thoughts. And it may feel like a small change, but it may be a fundamental one, is that we perhaps need to even look at what we call it, because we call it talent management. The word management implies, Sarah, as you've said, is I will manage you as a leader, as opposed to what we're really maybe moving to, which is talent enablement as an option. And the language we use as practitioners sometimes inadvertently maintains the status quo and creates that confusion. We say to people, enable your career, have your portfolio, choose your career path. You kind of do it on my terms and I'll guide you, type of thing. So just interested to hear your thoughts. Do we have, you know, right to fundamentals and change the language we use as well?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And culture as well. You know, Zani, we were talking before this session actually around culture playing such a key role in the, you know, the ways of working, the principles that an organization sets up. You know, even my head is then going to things like KPIs, performance reviews, objectives, you know, all of that is embedded within our organization, which is implying very much, you know, a group of people, leaders who know where we're going, who are equipped to deal with disruption and challenges that come our way, and leading and navigating a group of individuals, our employees, through that storm. However, what we're finding and what many organizations are making shifts towards are actually, we need the decision making, we need the ideas, the innovation, the problem solving to come from those individuals. So we need to kind of switch back on and enable and empower those individuals to think differently and to make decisions. So there is this kind of fundamental change that I think, you know, the market, the conditions that we're in are forcing us to think about. Brandon, if we move to the next slide, I think this Zani has a bit of animation. Zani's referenced the bridge quite a lot. How do we bridge our individuals and our organizations? And as we've started to talk around, you know, this is quite a big topic because it plays into some fundamentals of talent management, of leadership and management that have been around, you know, for years. And also culture, the culture that we set up within our organization, the behaviors that we encourage and we reward. So what we at SHL have started to focus on a bit is this acronym to purpose. How can we enable, how can organizations enable individuals to feel more of a sense of belonging, more of a sense of meaning and connection with the work and their colleagues, you know, that they're working with in an organization. And as we talked about, empower them to find opportunities to reinvent, to cope with challenges that come their way. And organizations, obviously a big goal for organizations right now is to remain relevant, to enable constant transformation in a world that is constantly changing and being disrupted. So both need each other, the individuals and the organizations, but perhaps it is a different type of relationship that we need to start to nurture. And we've talked about how people insight at SHL could be that kind of keystone, that connection, enabling objective understanding of what an individual or a team is capable of now, and what they could be, really importantly, capable of in the future. And with that objective view, objective understanding, then we can start to empower individuals to see those opportunities for new paths, for new roles, to develop different types of skills, which we're all going to need to do in order to kind of thrive in this world. So I think that brings us quite nicely into exploring that in a bit more depth, Brandon. So the kind of people insight and science side. So what do we need to know? What do we need to be doing around that piece?
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. And let me put the question, back to you to begin with, which is, and you spoke about that objective view, and one of the arguments is that objectivity comes from the data we collect in relation to our staff and our people. But to yourself, Sarah and Zani, it's as a start, what is the type of data that you are seeing organizations increasingly start to collect? We know we've always had that historic data, collect performance data. We talked about KPIs. And I
think we've lost Brandon.
Frozen, possibly.
And so that data is always sat naturally in an organization. Perfect. Zani, go ahead. So kind of just a question around data. What is the emerging data that organizations are starting to collect?
Yeah, I think we're still tempted in many situations to work with what we know. We're quite comfortable to measure the things that we can talk about, that we can define, that we can even access, because accessing information and translating it into data that we can measure and have quality performance conversations for the organization. I think that's where probably our comfort zone is, Brandon. Where the shifts probably need to happen is help me access information and data that is going to be that's going to help me answer questions that I don't know. Help me flag things I can't predict, that I can't really understand. I might have an idea, I might suspect, but I need the data that's going to help me clarify. And I think that's probably the space we're in now. And I'd like to borrow, Dave Ulrich's analogy. He's saying we probably need to shift from being problem solvers. We've got all from puzzle solvers. You've got all the puzzle pieces. You can see them. All you have to do is just make sure they fit into their little neat places, and then you've got the picture and you understand. But we're probably having to be mystery explorers, where data is helping us with, enable the curiosity and generate options, being able to predict a lot more. And I think being in the mystery space is probably where we are now, and that's how we should be using data. We can't just focus on the information that we have, that we know, that we can come up and analyze. I don't think that's the space we can win in. We need to be more in the unknown. Help me, what's coming. And we can never be absolutely sure, but we can be prepared so that we limit the vulnerabilities and we can see what disruption does. Those that were super vulnerable had a more of a negative outcome in terms of how they've coped with some of the external factors. But if you want external factors that you can't predict to not have that kind of impact, then use your data to help you look into the future more and not the past.
Brilliant. I love that idea of mystery explorers, and I will own that I don't know when I'm going to get copyright struck at this point in time, because I have Scooby-Doo in my head and the mystery bus. But I think it is a great way to, if you think about data, because data has always sat in these three spaces. We've become comfortable, Zani, as you've indicated, in collecting that data which is about the past. I know something about people's experiences and their skills, and I can do a skills audit, and I can do an audit of qualifications, and I can do performance, and so on and so forth. And it's sat comfortably with us because we've been doing it for so long. We've transitioned gradually to understanding something about you in the present. What are your motivators? What drives you? what are those elements that engage you? So back to that cultural component, with engagement that is coming to the fore, and your aspiration and your abilities and the like. But what we're really interested, as you rightly point out, is we're doing this because we're trying to help you into an unknown future, that mysterious future. And it's how do I begin to leverage data today that begins to help with some of that predictive component. And I guess that requires two parts of the data side. And interested to hear both yours and Sarah's thoughts, because we have to shift probably from being pure people scientists almost to being more business and data scientists, because that predictive component is not only about what do I think Brandon is and what does Brandon's journey potentially look like, but Brandon's journey exists within a context, within an organization. And I'm having to try and predict that as well. Where is the world going at a macro and a microeconomic level to help make Brandon's decisions more achievable? Because therein lies the risk, back to purpose. Because we also don't want to say to people, you can be anything, where the world in our business doesn't necessarily allow you to be anything. It's still going to put some constraints around what is possible for you. So interested to hear yours and Sarah's thoughts around that shift in terms of data, because it's no longer just about the people data. It's a much broader consideration of data and that's available.
Yeah, and the amount of data that we have access to has just exploded. So a lot of the data points that you've got on the screen there, I think a lot of people will be familiar with, and if you, as you say, have processes in place in their organization to collate that. But you know, just yesterday, start of the week, I got a message from Microsoft, I'm sure lots of people did, telling me about who I'm interacting with, who my top collaborators are, from an email, from a meeting point of view. So, and we're entering this realm where we can get data on anything, you know, interactions, meetings, where do we spend our time? We can make, as you say, Zani, kind of try and pull together data points to infer something about the future. So what are going to be the drivers of productivity? You know, when are we at our best? When do we start hitting that point where we're just not taking in any more information and we need to take breaks, you know, from a well-being and a sustainability point of view. So yeah, I think there is just so much out there. And we also need to be mindful of, you know, there's been a lot in the news around employers looking to supervise or monitor people's activities, so tracking what they're doing with their days and their time. And so there's, you know, there is that ethical side as well. So there's huge opportunity, but there's also some risk that we need to manage, and kind of getting ahead of that and really thinking about what data is, as you say, Zani, going to give us the predictive insight to cope with what might come next, seems to be the challenge that we need to navigate to be able to respond to next.
Yeah, I think Sarah, what is encouraging is that a lot of organizations, you know, have seen HR leaders invest a lot more in digital, because they've seen that for this picture to be possible, I have to invest in digital. The challenge for us is we're not sure if those digital platforms or solutions are going to put us in the game early enough, quick enough. Because often, you know, we may take 2-3 years to implement a solution, and by the time we've implemented, it's seen, you know, 40% usage, for example, and we're not able to then get what we intended to get. So I think you can't do the data. You can't be in the data journey without being in the digital journey. The two go together purely because we know that big data exists. There's volumes of data, lots of information, and it's coming from different, you know, angles. It's from everywhere. And I think if you're not investing in the digital piece and doing it in far more agile, using agile methodology, to borrow the IT term in this context, where you're able in a week's time. And I've been fortunate, I've worked with teams where overnight they can adapt a solution because it was built in-house. And for me, that has been the most positive experience in this journey, is being able to have the agile platforms The heavy HCM solutions, I think, are good anchors for this, but I'm not sure if they give you the kind of total solution that you need to be able to go, walk effectively in the data journey. So the digital is quite important to consider as well.
Zodi, I know we'll pick up the conversation on technology in a moment, because I think part of that agility and where and this isn't just about human resources, I think it's business in general, is we've looked for that magical one platform that does everything. And the reality is there's so many different data points that agility sometimes requires us to be comfortable with more than one platform. We don't want to have thousands, because your data gets too dispersed and is of little value then. But it's how do we begin to consolidate and be comfortable with the 3 or 4 platforms that allow us to answer meaningful and make meaningful business decisions, rather than getting caught up in, okay, but is it all in one place? Because that's just going to make it that much easier for me. But we can pick up that conversation when we talk a little bit about technology. But I'm also interested to hear from the audience in terms of another poll, is that if you think about the kinds of questions that are typically occurring within your business, which of these do you feel you'd be able to answer more comprehensively with either the people data you have or people data you would like to collect? So which of the following questions would you like to be able, so now we're looking a little bit at the future, to answer more comprehensively if you had the people data available? You can choose up to 3 there. Always interested to see who answers quickly. So answers coming in quite equally distributed across the options at the moment. While people are answering those questions, we'll come back to you. We'll at the same time, because what we're really doing, and to set the scene, and we'll come back to those questions, is it's really about moving from that historic being able to report on data. And I think, again, human capital has historically been very good at reporting. I can tell you what the demographics of my business look like and what percentage of people left and what turnover looks like in my business. But it's how do we convert that into something more meaningful, which allows me to make those business decisions and answer business questions rather than simply report on what we're seeing. So coming in, the bulk of the answers, and there's still a few coming in, so this may change. The key ask of people is really around, where are those hidden gems in my organization? And particularly if you've got an organization of hundreds of thousands of people, there's talent there. It's how do I unearth it in a meaningful way in order to give those, again, back to purpose. It's great to say we want to give people purpose and opportunity, but it's also about revealing them to allow for that opportunity to emerge is the one. And then very much, Zani, back to culture. Which cultural levers can I pull to build a more inclusive organization? Now, there's 2 elements in there for me. The one is the cultural levers, and then there's the questions of inclusivity. But interested just to get some immediate reflections from yourself and Sarah on those 2 that people are saying it's about unearthing the hidden gems in my business. And how do I use data to nudge culture? Because there's a big debate about whether you can change culture or whether you mold culture almost.
Yeah. I think the exciting thing, Brandon, about data is it can tell you the truth. I mean, we use the word fact, but it can be your mirror. And I recall one initiative I've observed is in the culture game, the individual leading the initiative drew a graphic of the leadership profile of the organization and therefore the culture of the organization. And what's great is using multiple data points. And I think that phrase listening strategies crept into our vocabulary now, where we're saying it's not just the once a year engagement surveys, etc., but we're going to look at multiple data points to kind of tell the truth and of that organization at that point in time, and be able to then, through really good, and this is, if you've got your data science, being able to visualize what that looks like for an organization. So I think definitely if you're wanting to pull the cultural levers, use the data to kind of give you that mirror of where you're at as an organization. And I think if you're using the multiple data points around leadership, you can do that quite cleverly. Mm-hmm. And I think for me around hidden gems, my immediate reaction is accessibility of data, availability of data. If you're wanting to, understand where are those gems, you're going to have to be able to find the data and make it visible. And it's got to be visible across, so your leaders are able to, again, see the picture across the organization. Often we say to our leaders, we're driving talent. We want to be able to find where our skills are, but we limit that accessibility. We limit the visibility of the data that we need to be able to address that particular point.
I think it's really interesting that actually if we'd asked this question about 5 years ago, probably option C would have been what everybody wanted to do. So how does our workforce capability benchmark against our competitors? Although, as you say, Zani, it's interesting now that people are, we're seeing that focus on I need to do more with my internal organization, my current employees. I know that, I believe they could do more. I just need to help and facilitate and find those opportunities. And also we're sort of, from a cultural point of view and health point of view of our organization, we're sort of shifting from sort of competence, capability to actually health and sustainability. So actually being able to use data and insights to anticipate where there might be risk or where there might be opportunity, and then facilitate those changes to enable progress, to enable transformation, like in hidden gems, that kind of functionality. But yeah, for me, it kind of that where the responses have fallen, I think, gives us a bit of a past and future in terms of that connection that we're trying to make.
Absolutely, thank you. And it speaks very well, Sarah, what you're saying there, to the shift that we're starting to see in relation to data. And it is this movement from organizations being really effective at reporting on the data they have. So, who are my high potentials? It's an important question, but it doesn't answer the next part of it, which is, okay, well, now that I've identified them, what do I do with them? And I think organizations have often got stuck at that reporting level, is who are my high potentials? And what does the demographic breakdown of that population look like? Or where do I, what's the key area that I should be focusing on development in terms of development? But it's really about, and that I think has occurred because the data points have often been quite disparate and separate. Whereas what we're really moving towards is answering these more meaningful questions, where we bring together the data through technology to allow for, and that's why we collect data, to make some form of decision. But I think there's another side of this as well, and once more to both yourself and Zani, Sarah, is we presuppose two things. Zani, you mentioned it earlier, is that we have the tools to make the data visible and accessible. And we'll talk a bit about that when we get to technology. But equally, there's an implicit assumption that people know what to do with the data once they've got it. Whether I'm an individual employee, so you can give me all my reports and the like, but if I don't know what to do with it, it's just an interesting set of data. Because we are wanting to move towards this more holistic people insight, which is then about not only who my high potentials are foreseeably, but how do I best deploy them such that it's aligned to my business requirements and their individual purpose and the like. And interested to hear your thoughts in relation to a whole range of things there, but initially around the shift from, I think we've talked about that, from data is static to data is actually being active. But to what extent is your experience around, do people know what to do with the data?
Yeah. I think, Brandon, this is where you can easily now quite clearly separate the human side of things and then the machine side of things, because often digital has been a threat for many, but this is where you can actually sell digital. That's what it can do for you. It can take the volumes of data. It can take, what you can't do as a human being, or if you tried it, you'd probably take a lot longer. But the machine is actually there to do that for you, Brandon. And I think that's where the type of technology investments need to be interrogated. What do I want the technology to do for me so that we're quite clear what the human side has to do in the organization. You know, we want our leaders to mentor more, we want our leaders to coach more. But certainly on the digital side, we should be saying we want the machines to be able to take the volumes of data and start doing whatever they need to do using the algorithms that we built, whatever the lingo is. I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm having to find myself to, you know, push myself in this direction to appreciate it so that I can understand what I can receive and expect from technology. And I certainly I don't think we should expect the human side to be managing volumes and volumes of data. I don't think that's where our value is as humans. I think that's where the machines can add value quite nicely for us from a technology perspective and from a data perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Zani. I think this is where the digital design and the data have to really come together. So if you want live data and insight, then you have to have systems and experiences that have purpose, that, you know, give meaning to somebody to engage in that activity. So, you know, I think this is, you know, where, as you were talking about earlier, the kind of HCM platforms coming together with that actual user design experience, that actually the only way we're going to get more data is if people engage in this technology, and it has some reason. So we can't just have, you know, maybe, as you referenced earlier, the kind of annual engagement survey that in most organizations is now becoming much more of a regular pulse check. Perhaps other things will go in that direction too, you know, performance reviews and feedback conversations much more embedded into the culture, into the everyday. But actually, how can we have technology and platforms that enable the capture of that data in a useful and meaningful way, and not just something that feels like onerous to complete? So yeah, I think it's a great point.
Yeah. I think, Sarah, Brandon, back to your question, if I look at, you know, where are hidden gems, if I look at an example, when you're looking at strategic workforce planning, you're wanting to understand, how do I strengthen my workforce? And the best way to do that is being able to overlay external data to the organization, to the internal data. Now, to expect an HR practitioner, humans, to do that, I think you're going to be needing quite a lot of time to do that. But you need to design and access solutions, you know, technologies that are able to augment a lot more information together to give you your scenarios so that you can then make the decision. So when it comes to where my hidden gems, you find those gems, but also you're able to give them options as well and say, here's what the data is telling you about the skills you have, the level, and potentially what you could do in future as an alternative, because you've got these skills as well. And I think it's almost near impossible to do that just on your own without the use of advanced technology.
Agreed. Zon is spot on, and it's an emerging sort of concept that I'm seeing in the marketplace as well, is the idea of the centaur, where we're bringing together the best of the machine and leveraging what the technology can bring, but understanding what are those unique elements that as practitioners we bring as well. Because I think at the moment, the relationship has almost been set up as dialectically opposed, is that it's either about the data or it's about the people, as opposed to, well, how do we leverage it in the middle to go, okay, I need to create a platform, as you indicated, which from a UX perspective is user-friendly. Because I think sometimes, with all due respect to the information technology spaces, they build around the technology without necessarily about how the technology is going to be utilized. At the same time, the end user wants to go, well, make it easy for me, but I still need to trust that the data that's being incorporated is valid, reliable, objective, and the like as well. So I think, as we've indicated a few things there, I mean, the UX component and making it easy for people to use data is a critical starting point. Whether I am an individual employee, how can I use this data to determine where my path lies in terms of succession planning, as an example? Or as a business, when I'm looking at the collective, that overlay, mergers and acquisitions, is if I've gone through a merger, what have I funny with mergers and acquisitions. We spend a lot of time doing due diligence around the financials, but we very rarely ask the question of what am I getting from a people perspective in a merger and acquisition, and that collective question. One that's sort of sitting in the back of my head, and I'm interested to hear your and Sarah's thoughts, is part of the power of the technology and the data lies in, Sonia, you talked about visibility, is that as an end user, I will only trust that data when I see it having an impact for me. So often we complete an engagement survey, but I don't ever see anything happen with my results. And I think that's where we also have a role to play, is how do we as practitioners more explicitly link those two together so that people can then go, actually, I do believe that the data is positively impacting my career journey, and I can see how it's being used in an organization, either because I use it myself. But I think a lot of the data we collect ends up going somewhere, and something may or may not happen, and I just don't know what, and how the technology can enable that.
And I think this is where human meets machine, is when you take the data the machine gives you and convert it to insight. I don't think it's useful to just have data being available. It's got to be meaningful and come back to, well, what was my original intent, or what are the problems I'm having to solve, and translate that into the stakeholder usage. So if I'm an employee, I click on a dashboard, the dashboard's giving me insights, all sorts of insights. I can take action as an individual because then it's meaningful. It talks to my pain points. It talks to what I need to think about. I may not use it all, but certainly I've got enough insights to take action, Brandon. And I think for me, that's where it becomes magic. I think data on its own is not enough. It can easily overwhelm. But as soon as the two merge, your HR practitioners are then able to take that and able to go and have conversations, whether they're facilitating, strategic conversations, or trying to answer difficult questions or solve problems, or enable, as we said earlier, the employee. That's where, for me, it all comes together quite nicely. Not easily, but nicely.
But I think it's also because now the data becomes a living, because I think we also have this habit of seeing data as a point in time, as opposed to it has a life, and that life continues, and I can use it to answer a variety of different questions, as opposed to the sort of static one-to-one. I answer question X because it's going to help me with solution Y. Whereas actually the data collected as part of the process of X has application in different ways across a variety of different business practices at different levels for different stakeholders, depending on whether it's at a board level or right down to the individual level. And to make sure that technology allows for that, balanced, as you've said, against the practitioner that knows how to work with that data in order to support that initial question, which is, why are we doing this to begin with?
I think it also poses important questions for us all about transparency, and how prepared or ready are we in our organisations to, as you say, Brandon, actually see and share these results. So, and different organisations will be in different states of readiness for that level of transparency. Some, perhaps coming to terms with being really transparent right now around business performance metrics, but actually, could we be in a place across lots of organisations where we have a live feed of organisational health metrics, and things around inclusion, around engagement, cultural measures, collaboration. Actually, you could see there being this kind of data feed, and so there's I think there is. It asks us questions about what we're ready for, what culturally we want to build and enable, and there won't be one size fits all in terms of the answer that works.
And I think it ties nicely to, I see a comment that's coming from Susan around the digital enablement is such a critical element in that, is to what extent that becomes inherent in the cultures of our business, that people are comfortable working with not only the digital, but the outcome of the digital, which is in many instances the data. And it's that, I think, breaking down and bringing together the technology and the people, and what our role becomes as practitioners then, HR professionals is that we no longer allow the debate between it's either technology or people to persist, but rather to start pushing the combination where they come together, which means we, and Zani, as you rightly pointed out, is that what I know about machine learning is incredibly dangerous. But I have a responsibility now to learn about it, because it's going to be having an impact on the people that I have a role for and with. And I can no longer hide behind, well, it's something that IT does, AI and machine learning and programming and coding. No, you can't anymore. And I think that is a shift that we have to also make as HR practitioners, is to become more comfortable with that side and to be more transparent and to understand what the data is doing, because people will ask that of us. I'm very mindful we have 5 minutes left that to wrap it up. So Sarah, I'm going to hand it over to you just to bring it together. It's always nice, the 55 minutes of really interesting conversation. Can you summarize it in 3 minutes perhaps? Just to Sarah, for yourself, just to bring it together for us.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I think hopefully that it's been a useful conversation for everybody dialing in and seeing some good comments and chat coming through as well from the audience. And we wanted to end a bit on kind of where to start, and referencing the conversation we were just having then around organizations being at different states of readiness, different stages in their journey. And actually, I think it's a bit like, again, when we were talking in advance of this conversation, we talked briefly about the big explosion in the world of customer and consumer data. Actually, it feels like people analytics and HR are on the cusp of something very similar here, in that we are now able to connect and access so many different data points that we need to carefully consider what is going to be important, relevant, meaningful for us in our organizations and as employees. So there's a huge amount to think about, but actually some steps that I think we as employees, as practitioners, as HR, as leaders can start to take to get us into the best position. So I'll just start with one top tip, and then I'll ask Zani and Brandon for you to pick out something as well that you'd like to share. But I think the one I'll start with is the first one here around quality inputs. So we touched on conversations a bit around ethics. So, just because data is there doesn't always mean that it has been collated in a valid and fair way, and also that it hasn't always been designed to be used in the way that you might be considering using it. So I think there's a real onus on us in this space to really think carefully about what is in that data and is it a quality input before we start to extrapolate something from it. So quality inputs. Zani, what would be your top tip or something to kind of consider in terms of where to start?
Yeah, I think practical step I'd like to is a message for leaders. I think for leaders, it's again, what mirrors are we holding up for them in order for them to understand what culture they're actually building to enable those strategies that they've kind of come up with, because you may have come up with quite an ambitious strategy as an organization, but you need to understand what culture the leader's creating. So this is specifically for the leadership piece. I think for HR practitioners, again, it's some of the trends we're seeing, and I think Gartner's position this is it's okay to bring in gig workers in HR to kind of push some of the newer thinking. If you think about the use of data, technology, maybe more behavioral scientists, those kinds of skills can be kind of brought in temporarily to help HR practitioners make some of these shifts, because I don't think you can all of a sudden expect people to be able to take on a new skill or be able to perform a certain, new way of doing things. So certainly that, allow for flexibility in your structures to bring in new skills to help you start making these shifts or respond to the shifts and prepare for the next shifts, right? And I think not to forget what we mentioned earlier, enable individuals to be self-directed, enable individuals to be able to kind of respond better to the future and be more mobile, etc., whatever it is that you're advocating for, and not to disempower and disable. So that's certainly those are some of the practical things that you can start doing.
Absolutely. Great shout on the ecosystem, including external as well as internal employees. I think, yeah, that's a really good point. And Brandon, final thoughts, final tips from you.
Certainly echo both, Sarah, what you've shared and Zani have shared. And I think for me it is, and an interesting article, I know, Sarah, you shared it internally yesterday around the humanness that is required from our leaders as we go as the world evolves. But I think we need to balance that against, we always look to the leaders as the sole place where the solutions are found. And I think leaders need to be comfortable with the vulnerability of not knowing and being open to those solutions coming from within their teams. And that means I can't think about it as talent management anymore. It's now about talent enablement and how I leverage the full extent of the people I have in my business. Leverage the full. So I hope you don't have to rush out of the building because it's on fire. So it's then about, just awesome. But I think it is about bringing together, the vulnerability of a leader together with using the technology and the data they have to help people to find purpose and ultimately to be human as organizations.
Well, we could certainly talk about all of this for hours. It probably should have been a whole day session. But thank you three so much for sharing all your expertise, knowledge, and insights. Much appreciated. I've definitely learned a lot, and I know there's a lot of things to unpack there for our audience. From everybody that's tuned in, thank you so much for doing so. We hope we found it useful too. And hopefully see you next time. Sarah, Zani, and Brandon, thanks again, and look forward to working with you again soon.
Awesome.
Thank you
very much.
Keep safe.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.